A desperate mother knocked on strangers' doors on an ordinary night, claiming a man had stolen her car and kidnapped her two young children. The sobbing, trembling voice and visible anguish seemed to depict a brutal abduction, worthy of the darkest headlines. But what initially appeared to be an act of urban violence would soon turn into an even crueler and unimaginable story. How could someone be both a victim and the prime suspect? And after all, could a mother truly sacrifice what is most precious in the name of passion? The first question found its answer in the investigation. The woman's own narrative began to contradict itself, opening space for suspicion. The second revealed the most disturbing truth. Yes, the desire to be loved can, in extreme cases, drive someone to commit the most unthinkable crime of all. Her name was Susan Smith, and for days the country believed in her performance. The young woman, seen as a devoted mother, appeared before cameras pleading for the return of Michael, just 3 years old, and Alexander, a 14-month-old baby. The town of Union, South Carolina, became the epicenter of vigils, collective prayers, and tireless searches. While volunteers scoured woods, lakes, and farms, the press turned that small community into a national stage. Yet details began to erode her version. The composite sketch of the supposed kidnapper seemed forced, and the traffic light that Susan claimed had stopped her car only worked with sensors that weren't active that night. With each interview, the country saw a mother who cried without tears, who seemed to thrive on attention. Her husband, David, remained at her side, convinced of her innocence. But investigators, alert to inconsistencies, already suspected the story was not what it seemed. And so, under the glare of spotlights and the scrutiny of millions, the narrative of maternal suffering began to crumble. What would soon come to light would not only shock a small town, but expose to the world a devastating truth. The monster is not always outside the home. Sometimes it is born within it. In the early days after the disappearance, Susan Smith was seen as the embodiment of maternal grief. On camera, she begged for her children's return, pleading that whoever had them, leave them somewhere safe. Recordings showed an exhausted woman, always flanked by her husband and supported by neighbors and religious leaders. The entire community believed they were facing a cruel kidnapping, with faith as their only weapon against fear. The nation was moved by the image of a seemingly shattered mother, while churches filled with people praying for the boys. Behind the emotion, however, investigators struggled to reconcile the facts with Susan's story. The traffic light, a key element in her version, didn't function as she had described. Crime experts also noted an incongruity. Car thieves rarely abduct children, and even less likely would they leave the mother behind. These details cast doubt on the authenticity of her report. While national reporters flocked to Union, local journalists whispered that the supposed victim seemed more concerned with being seen than with answering questions. Observers noticed her tears left no trace on her face. As 9 days of searching dragged on, the pressure mounted. Volunteer teams combed forests, police set up roadblocks, and divers searched lakes. Yet nothing pointed to the whereabouts of Michael and Alexander. What grew instead was the sense that their mother knew more than she was admitting. With each new interview, the public's trust weakened, and detectives, now watching every gesture, began to consider the possibility that the kidnapping was nothing but a calculated hoax. With the story plastered across every newscast, Susan became the center of attention. Across America, families prayed for Michael and Alexander, while morning shows invited experts to discuss the case. What should have been a show of solidarity turned into a parallel trial. Some saw her as a tragic victim, others already suspected her overly polished demeanor on camera. News outlets broadcast a young mother who did not shy away from the spotlight, agreeing to national interviews. This behavior clashed with the image of someone supposedly devastated by loss. Meanwhile, police focused on the inconsistencies. The polygraph told a striking story. David Smith, the children's father, passed easily, but Susan struggled to answer questions about her son's safety. It wasn't hard evidence, but it deepened suspicions. Sheriff Howard Wells, who had known Susan since childhood, felt the weight of doubt grow heavier. In abduction cases, every detail mattered, and he pressed Susan more personally. The composite sketch she had given was also criticized by members of the black community, who accused investigators of racial bias. By then, the search had mobilized hundreds of volunteers, but yielded nothing. There was no evidence a kidnapper even existed, no sign of escape or planning. All investigators had was the mother's increasingly shaky word. As tearless sobs filled primetime television, detectives became convinced the key to the mystery lay in Susan's hands, and that the truth would soon explode. After 9 fruitless days, the case had become not just a local tragedy, but a real-time national spectacle. Contradictions piled up, and investigators were sure Susan's story would not withstand more pressure. Sheriff Wells, aware of his personal connection to her, tried a softer approach. He invited her to a private talk, away from reporters. His tone was different, not accusatory but almost pastoral. Still, each question cornered her further. The woman who had insisted on the kidnapping narrative began to falter. "Would you like to pray with me?" Wells asked gently, attempting to break her denial. At that moment, Susan broke down. Between sobs, she admitted the unthinkable. "It was me. I did it." The confession stunned the agents. She then described in detail what had happened on October 25, 1994. She drove to John D. Long Lake with her sons in the car, consumed by despair after being rejected by Tom Finley. She said she had thought of suicide, but abandoned the idea. Instead, she decided her children shouldn't live without her. Twice, she tried to let the car roll into the lake, but lost her nerve. On the third attempt, she released the brake, stepped out, and watched as the vehicle slid toward the water. Michael and Alexander remained strapped in their seats as the car sank slowly beneath the surface. The revelation was devastating. What the nation had believed to be a violent kidnapping was, in fact, a deliberate act by a mother in emotional collapse. Following her confession, divers located the car submerged about 120 feet from shore. Inside, the boys' bodies confirmed the worst. Hardened men, accustomed to brutality, wept openly at the sight. By the next morning, divers retrieved the car. Slowly, it was pulled to the surface. Silence hung heavy until broken by the sobs of police officers. Inside, still strapped in their car seats, were Michael and Alexander, dead for more than a week. Witnesses called it one of the most painful scenes Union had ever endured. When the news broke, the United States reeled. Newspapers screamed, "Mother confesses killed her sons." TV networks cut regular programming to show the car being pulled from the lake. Vigils turned into memorials. The community of Union, already burdened by media intrusion, became the symbol of collective grief. As the city struggled to process, more details emerged. Investigators found Tom Finley's breakup letter inside the car. For prosecutors, this was the motive. It was not simply despair. It was Susan's attempt to clear the obstacles between her and the life she wanted. Immediately after confessing, Susan Smith was charged with 2 counts of murder. Sheriff Wells announced to the press that the search was over, and the truth was worse than anyone had imagined. The country erupted in rage. Images of Susan escorted by officers spread everywhere, fueling indignation. Prosecutor Tommy Pope declared firmly, she chose her love life over her children's lives. The arrest gave way to a new spectacle, the courtroom. Even before the trial began, debates raged on TV. Psychologists tried to explain how a mother could commit such an atrocity, while pundits demanded the death penalty. The defense framed her as fragile, abused, and emotionally unstable, incapable of rational action. But the public was unforgiving. To most, nothing could excuse rolling a car into a lake with two babies inside. In July 1995, Union was once again overrun by reporters. Though cameras were barred, every detail of the trial was dissected in the media. The prosecution's strategy was clear: prove Susan acted coldly, motivated solely by her desire for Tom Finley. They used his breakup letter as centerpiece, alongside the damning fact that Susan had 6 whole minutes while the car sank to save her sons, and chose not to. The defense painted her as a victim of borderline personality disorder shaped by abuse and rejection. Experts argued the crime was more a failed suicide than murder. But their arguments fell flat against the weight of evidence and emotion. The trial climaxed when David Smith, the father, testified. Through tears, he described Michael's boundless energy and Alexander's joyful smile. He begged the jury for the death penalty. His pain cut deep. Even jurors cried. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated only 2.5 hours. The verdict: guilty of double murder. The prosecution demanded execution. The defense pleaded for her life. In the end, the jury chose life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Some explained they believed lifelong incarceration was harsher than death. Susan Smith was sentenced to life and transferred to South Carolina's state prison. Yet even behind bars, her name returned to headlines. In 2000, just 5 years later, scandal broke. She had sexual relationships with 2 prison guards, both later fired. Critics said it proved she hadn't changed. Her manipulative, self-destructive patterns continued. Meanwhile, David Smith struggled to survive his grief. On the 10th anniversary of his son's deaths, he admitted he once put a gun in his mouth at their gravesite, begging God for courage to pull the trigger, but couldn't. He later remarried and had 2 more children, yet the trauma never faded. To friends, he was resilient, but forever scarred. The Susan Smith case became one of the most infamous American crimes of the 1990s, not just for its cruelty, but for how it shattered deeply held ideals of motherhood as synonymous with sacrifice and protection. The idea that a mother could deliberately kill her children shook the world. 3 decades later, the debate lingers. Was she a cold-blooded monster or a victim of her unstable mind? For prosecutors, the answer was clear: choice. For her defenders, trauma and collapse. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. A woman broken by her past, yet still fully responsible for the choice she made. Michael and Alexander remain the true victims, remembered as innocent lives stolen too soon. The John D. Long Lake, once an ordinary setting, became a permanent symbol of loss. And Susan Smith remains behind bars, awaiting the faint possibility of parole. Her name forever etched in history as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can dwell behind the face of a mother.
Enjoyed this case? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories like this. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Hit the like button to support our work and share this video with fellow true crime fans.